The OnePlus 6T has just come out, only a few days after the curious iPhone XR, and my Twitter has been flooded with questions about battery life, so here are the answers. Welcome to the battery test. All phones right now are on 100%, and the first thing to quickly do is to calibrate the displays. So I'm using a plain white internet page and a luminance meter to check that each is at an equivalent brightness, not necessarily each one's maximum brightness because, well, that varies. Bear in mind they may look a little different on camera, but that's partly because of the different white balances on each screen, and partly because of the slight angle the camera is seeing some of them from. First things first, we're pulling up Soundcloud, and I've set the volume on each phone to an equivalent level, because just like with the displays, there's quite a disparity here. The OnePlus 6T has a single downwards firing speaker, whereas all four other phones have some sort of dual speaker setup. Moving over to Twitter now, and in this video generally we're going to try and simulate not an extreme scenario like we usually do with pure gaming and benchmarks, but more of a typical usage case, with music, social media, and then some games. So thumbs up if that is something you prefer, because, well, it takes a hell of a lot of time to film. The iPhone XR has already fallen into last place, which is kind of a surprising result because typically iPhones tend to show a higher battery percentage towards the beginning as they are starting to deplete. Now moving over to Facebook, because let's be honest, social media is probably where a large portion of your smartphone usage time goes. And I'm really curious to see not just the OnePlus 6T, but also how the Mate 20 Pro performs, because whilst I've been using that as my main phone, and we already know the battery is pretty great, I'm yet to do a side-by-side comparison like this. But on paper, it's got a lot going for it, the largest capacity of the bunch, and an efficient 7nm chip. So let's see. So far, looking at the current results, the OnePlus 6T is doing pretty well. It's pretty much on par with the XS Max, the Mate 20 Pro, and the Note 9, which are all sitting there in one cluster together. And one of the main reasons for this is the display resolutions. You might notice that for this test, as most of the phones are running at closer to 1080p, I've set the Note 9 and the Mate 20 Pro, which can have their resolutions adjusted to default Full HD Plus resolutions. In the past, I have used the Note 9 on its maximum Quad HD Plus setting, so it'll be interesting to see if changing it back to stock allows it to beat out the XS Max, as well as how it compares to the new 6T. Right, so nearly 2.5 hours into this test now, and you'll notice the iPhone XR has been completely left behind, which is a bit of a weird result, because the iPhone XR is claimed to be the best iPhone for battery life ever. Its display size and resolution are lower than the XS Max, and this is only the second charging cycle on the phone, so there is zero room for the battery to have deteriorated here. But there are a few potential explanatory factors. This phone's battery capacity is the smallest of the bunch, and while iPhones can typically make do with less capacity, the XR is the only phone here to use a power-hungry LCD display. But even then, this alone doesn't explain the sheer size of the gap we're seeing, and my suspicion is that a lot of the other tests will have used all phones on their maximum brightness, whereas because the XR's display isn't quite as bright as the others and its viewing angle's not as consistent, I've had to set its brightness percentage higher, and this is most probably working against it. Bringing attention back to the Android phones, you'll notice the Huawei Mate 20 Pro has now got a slight lead over the Note 9, which in itself is slightly ahead of the OnePlus 6T. It's still very tight though. I was almost expecting to see a larger difference between the Mate and the Note 9. The OnePlus is performing well, and I didn't expect any less. Since the OnePlus 5, their phones have offered consistently good battery life considering their capacity. I would say this reputation slipped a little with the 5T and the 6 because the company kept the same battery capacity but kept making the screen larger. But now with the 6T, the battery life has been increased to match. And clearly this, combined with Android 9 and all the little fiddling that OnePlus does under the hood, has led to a phone that is very well optimized. So we're nearing the 5-hour mark now, and the iPhone XR, well, really both iPhones, are a fair bit behind the other 3 Android phones. But a few things to bear in mind. Firstly, that the 3 Android phones we are comparing them against are pretty much the best of the best, which is making it look like the iPhone's completely failed, when actually it's all relative. Not to mention that even though in this test we're not doing benchmark after benchmark, this is still a demanding scenario. We've got the Wi-Fi on, we've got Bluetooth on, we've got brightnesses all set to high, and even the speakers on. Also, because the OnePlus 6T has only a 1080p display, and the Mate 20 Pro and Galaxy Note 9 have been set to 1080p, this makes the iPhone XS Max the phone that is pushing the most pixels, not to mention the one that is doing it across the largest area. As we near the end of the test, I'm just going to speed up the timer to finish it off quickly, but notice that the OnePlus 6T and the Galaxy Note 9 have lost a massive chunk of battery here. Whether that's the gaming or the video compression, I'm not too sure, but either way, it puts the iPhone XS Max ahead of the OnePlus 6T. Mind you, that's hardly an insult. iOS 12, which is what that phone is running on, is very, very efficient when it comes to battery management, and the same can be said for the A12 Bionic chip that is powering it. It's not long before the XS Max then goes, and this leaves the Note 9 with just a couple of percent left, and the Mate 20 Pro, which now has a pretty substantial lead and is sitting at 12, well, now 11. The Note 9 is now finished with over 7 hours of on-screen time, and if we fast forward a little bit, you'll see that the timer actually runs out before the Mate 20 Pro does. This is the first time I think this has ever happened on one of these tests. So to continue to keep track of the phone, I've had to look at the actual time and then work backwards from there. So yeah, there goes the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, and that leaves us with the results. So in 5th place was the iPhone XR with 5 hours and 1 minute. And I did check online, and a lot of people seem to have this phone pegged as better performing than the XS Max. But I even charged both of those phones up again and redid the test with a similar result. So my best guess is that when you set the iPhone XR to an equivalent brightness, not just putting max brightness on all phones, it doesn't seem to last as long as the XS Max. This was followed by the OnePlus 6T with a really solid 6 hours and 47. About 9 minutes later, the XS Max finished. And remember, whilst what we've done here isn't an extreme usage case, it's definitely an above average one. So each of these top 4 phones I'd say has got very strong battery life. You've then got the Note 9 with 7 hours and 7 minutes, which is 11 minutes ahead of the iPhone XS Max. But bear in mind that this is when it's on its 1080p setting. If you do set the Note to its maximum resolution, we've done that comparison before, the iPhone XS Max tends to outlast it. And last but not least, the Huawei Mate 20 Pro. 7 hours 44 is how long it ended up lasting, which is, wow, pretty much the best performing battery I've ever seen on a mainline flagship phone. But at the same time, whilst it is ahead of the Note 9, the XS Max and the OnePlus 6T, it's not so far ahead that I would call it in a different league. And all 4 of those phones, as I said, offer very serviceable battery life. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.